Is also with us talking about the international papers. She's going to start today in Syria, in fact, the siege in eastern Aleppo that we were talking about right at the top of the bulletin. According to the UN, 250,000 people trapped there, Flo, in rebel neighbourhoods.
That's right. The UN certainly has sounded the alarm. Lots of papers are reporting on their description of what's happening in Aleppo. They say civilians are trapped, starving, bombed, deprived of medical and humanitarian assistance. The UN has described this as a deliberate strategy, a kind of collective punishment. This is an interesting article in Asharq Al-Awsat, that's a pan-Arab paper based in London, that says, it's so shocked, it says there are no words that can describe the situation in Aleppo, where the regime is deliberately bombing civilians and hospitals.
So they can't find the words, so instead they've come up with a cartoon, haven't they, to depict the situation?
That's right. The situation in Syria as a whole, in fact. This cartoon depicts a Syria under siege. You can see the regime has the whole country trapped behind this barbed wire wall. Now, you might wonder what those little watchtowers are. Well, they represent Iran and Russia, Bashar al-Assad's biggest allies, of course. Now, there's another cartoon I've pulled out from Al-Watan, that's another Arab language paper, which shows the everyday horror for Syrian children in particular. You can see death is always around the corner, including at schools. The headline there says that Syrian schools are being targeted, and you can see that Grim Reaper in front of the blackboard.
Let's stay in the region, but Turkey, in fact, in the spotlight today. The Prime Minister withdrawing in the last hour or so a controversial bill that would have pardoned men accused of statutory rape if they were to marry their victims.
That's right. Now, as you can imagine, this has drawn a lot of outrage, protests in Turkey. Let's take a look at the Hurriyet Daily News. It calls this legislation mind-boggling in this article. Turkey is not only going backwards in leaps and bounds, it's starting to take a step towards the primitive. Now, lots of critics say that this so-called child rape bill will actually legitimize statutory rape and encourage the practice of taking child brides. There's another interesting article, this is in the opposition paper Daikin, which is also outraged and says, look, the whole rest of the world is trying to fight against pedophilia, banning child weddings, increasing the minimum age of marriage, and here we have our government that is actually taking a step backwards towards the Middle Ages.
And of course, the Turkish government saying the bill was not intended to pardon rapists, but actually to address underage marriage.
That's right, because the government says this is actually a widespread practice. The legal age for marriage is 18. That can go down to 16 with the consent of a judge. But according to religious laws, it's 12. And so this is Haberturk, the pro-government daily, that says that the idea here is to exonerate men from being imprisoned who religiously married these underage girls with their family's consent. So it's just trying to make the religious marriage more legal, I guess you could say. And this article goes on to say that this practice is quite widespread, particularly in southeastern Turkey.
A lot of papers, though, saying it's really part of a wider crackdown on women's rights, in fact.
That's right. L'Humanité, the communist daily here, says that women are President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's other enemy, because, of course, the list is long, according to L'Humanité. You have intellectuals, artists, the media, political opponents, and women. And this isn't a new phenomenon, according to L'Humanité. They really come back on Erdogan's comments about women. He has said some pretty controversial things. He, for instance, has recently said that the place of women is at home making babies, and this is what religion, the role that religion has come up for them. And this article describes an interesting fact, and that's the fact that his conservative and patriarchal policies are very different from what we see in Kurdish communities, where there is a strict equality between men and women. So it's very different policies.
Okay, this next story is one that Stephen and I were chatting about before you came in on set, in fact, Flo. Something completely different. Papers in the US, they're continuing to react to this month's presidential election. Now, yesterday, President-elect Donald Trump met with the press. Now, apparently it didn't go so well.
It didn't go down so well. There's several papers talking about this. Let's take a look, first of all, at the Washington Post here. You can see a defiant Trump meets TV news crowd in a private meeting and lets them have it. Now, there were some news executives, some well-known TV journalists, and he was Well, I guess you could say maybe insulting towards them, especially towards CNN and NBC. He told them that their campaign reporting was unfair and dishonest. Now, there's a very colorful description of this meeting in the New York Post. You can see they're talking about this off-the-record meeting, and you can see, I can't actually say this, I'm not allowed to say this, but it was a firing squad. It begins with an F. And what's interesting is they thought that they were going in this meeting to, learn about the access they were going to have for the White House, et cetera. Very different story. But what's interesting is if you look at the official version, this is Kellyanne Conway, Trump's spokeswoman, who said that the meeting was excellent. So maybe that's her version of what an excellent meeting is.
Depends how you look at it, I suppose. And finally, Trump's grandfather, he's in the spotlight, isn't he?
That's right. Now, this is an interesting story that's all over the press. I pulled out an article from the Wall Street Journal here. This is a newly unearthed letter that shows how Trump's grandfather begged to stay in Germany. This was back in 1905. Friedrich Trump begged local authorities in southern Germany to revoke an expulsion order because he had avoided military service as a teenager. I guess something's run in the family. Now, his plea seemed, it was unsuccessful, in fact. And so in the end, he had to settle for life across America. Lots of papers are reporting about this. I guess some Democrats wish they could travel back in time to change.
What a shame.
To
change that piece of paper. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Flo. Flo reporting there on Trump's grandfather. In the next half hour of the programme, we're going to be reporting from Nigeria. In fact, there have been 1,600, would you believe it, attacks on oil and gas installations over the past year in Nigeria alone, as a serious lack of jobs and infrastructure in disarray has left locals feeling they've been dealt a serious injustice. With a special report then in focus in the next half an hour.